I think when most people think about the fiscal health of our nation, whether you're Republican or Democrat, you understand that there's not in good shape, as we've talked about already during this hearing. And it's been that way for a long period of time. There's some fundamental tenets we can all agree on, that our national debt of $36.2 trillion is out of control, that our government should live within its means, just like families and small businesses have to, that there's waste, fraud, and abuse that's in our federal government that should be rooted out, and that American families and our economy benefit from low taxes. You know, as a fiscal conservative, I believe we can tackle our spending problems and provide tax relief for everyday Americans, entrepreneurs, and businesses, and we can do it responsibly in a manner that encourages growth in our economy. I know there's been a lot of discussion back and forth about who got the best benefit out of tax cuts that came out of 2017 and who would be hurt the worst moving forward. I can say this, in my home state of Kansas, there will be an average of $2,200 tax increase for the average Kansan if we don't extend the Trump tax cuts moving forward. On our spending front, I mean, we're borrowing $70,000 every second. That's not sustainable or responsible. We can't fix all the Washington spending overnight, but Congress has an opportunity now to tackle this growing problem and to address the bloated spending. And I believe now is the time to focus on bending the spending curve. Raising taxes is not a way to address growing deficits. As talked about earlier, we've seen a pretty consistent 17 to 18% of tax revenue, of GDP comes in as tax revenue, regardless of where the actual percentage is. From my standpoint, I'd rather have a growing economy and having tax policy that helps support that growing economy so GDP becomes bigger, so that 17 to 18% is also a bigger amount of tax revenue that comes in for us. We can't raise taxes enough to encourage that economic growth and expect that we get more tax revenue. Squeezing more money will actually have the reverse effect out of that. And that's why it's so critical that we focus on pro-growth, pro-family, pro-worker policies that were established in the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. And just as we talk about what the impact could be, I just want to go through a couple of the provisions that will expire this year. I mean, as part of that TCJA passed in 2017, the child tax credit was doubled. We increased the standard deduction. So now, instead of 27% of the people having to itemize, it's down to 7 or 8% of the people are having to itemize because they get that advantage of the higher standard deduction. And lower rates across the board for everybody. And these aren't provisions that just affect millionaires and billionaires, but it affects everybody. It affects everyday, ordinary day Kansans. So like one of my constituents, Kaylee, who was, as a single mom in 2019, had more money to buy clothes and food for her daughter, thanks to TCJA. We can't continue to spend more that comes in tax revenue. Our fiscal challenges don't come from people being able to keep more of the money. It comes from this excess spending. Revenue from the Treasury has been up more than 50% since we passed TCJA, but spending has far outpaced it, growing at 70%. Dr. Winfrey, what I think is sometimes hard for folks to grasp is that there's an inverse relationship between taxes and revenue. When we passed TCJA, rates were lowered, but because we had such strong economic growth in the economy, we saw higher wages and more investment. How does growth in the economy affect our fiscal trajectory?
Well, there are two things that happened when TCJA was enacted. The first thing that happened is that the rates on investment went down. So you saw more investment because the market responded. The second thing that you saw is that because more people had more money in their pockets, aggregate demand went up. That also drove growth. And that's one of the reasons why we saw higher revenue numbers come out after the enactment of the TCJA.
Yep. Well, thank you. Dr. Rao, can we tax our way to economic prosperity in the country?
Well, absolutely not. And you know, one of the big challenges I think that is faced by members of this committee and anybody trying to do tax policy is that pretty much all of the numbers that are being put forward by the scoring agencies, CBO and JCT, in my view, are underestimating the effect that taxes have on growth and on economic activity. And that's a major challenge. All of the private estimates as well are, in my view, based on insufficient economic response parameters. And that doesn't mean you don't have to cut spending, you do. It doesn't mean that the tax cuts don't cost anything, they do, but they don't cost as much as they're being scored.
Well, thank you. And I think it's pretty clear that as we talk through today, when we focus on, and Republicans are focusing on, how can we accomplish more than one thing with the reconciliation bill, we've got to address our national debt, and we've got to make sure that the Americans we represent aren't stuck with a massive tax hike while we're continuing to grow a tax revenue. And I want to thank you all panelists for being here, and I appreciate the opportunity that you give to talk about some of the issues that are really being faced in the real world.